Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Working Better Together, How to Manage Sub-Awards and Sub-Recipients. My name is Jamel Evans with the OJP TFSC. And before we begin, let's go over a couple of tips. This live discussion webinar is being hosted by the OJP, or the Office for Justice Programs. If you have any technical issues during this session, please contact myself, Jamel Evans, in the chat area, or just email me at ojptfsc@usdoj.gov. You can also access the information brochure and the FAQs with the links that I'll provide in the chat. In order to have the most accurate attendance, please tell us in the chat box the number of people joining you on the session, including yourself. So everything except the Q&A session will be recorded today, and live captions are available during this session, and you can access those by clicking the transcriptions button on the bottom parts of your Zoom screen. Since your feedback is so important to us, at the end of the webinar, we'll provide a survey link. Before we begin, let's go over a couple of Zoom tips. So on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you will see a microphone icon. You just click that to unmute. You click it again, you see a red slash. That's how you know you're muted. And if you're dialed in over the phone, you can just press *6 to unmute yourself. If you're not speaking today, please ensure you mute yourself just to avoid any background noise or interruptions. To the right of the microphone icon, you'll see a video icon. You just click that to start your video. Click it again, you see a red slash, and that's how you know your video is off. To the right of those icons, you see a chat icon. And you click that to open up your chat window, and this is where we're going to communicate with everyone on the platform today. So let's just give it a little test right now. Just let me know the last thing you have for breakfast or dinner in a chat. So if you want to send like a private message or anything like that throughout the session, you can do so with the little drop-down menu in your chat. You just click that and select who you want to send a message to, and just compose your message and send it. Today, we do have live transcripts automatically activated, and you should see those on your screen right now. On the top right hand of your screen, you can change your viewing experience. So you can go with the speaker view or the gallery view to see everyone who's on the platform. So let's meet our presenters. Our first presenter is Crystal McNeil Wright. She's an associate CFO for the Grants Financial Management Division in the Office for Justice program, and she brings more than 30 years of leadership and management experience. Crystal is also a published author of a book on parenting. Today, we'll also have Michael Williams. Michael is a staff accountant trainer for the Evaluation and Oversight branch in the Grants Financial Management Division. Mr. Williams brings more than 20 years of accounting and financial management training experience to the position. We'll also have Carlin Hertz. He's a financial specialist for the OJP TFSC, serving the American Samoa, Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Also joining us today is Russ Bermejo. He's a senior training and technical assistant specialist for the OJP TFSC. And last and certainly not least, we'll have Francis Mendez. He's a project director for the OJP TFSC. And Francis has a background in law, social work, and business administration. So without further ado, I would like to pass it over to Crystal McNeil Wright.
Thank you so much, Jamil. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to you in Guam, North Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. As Jamil said, my name is Crystal McNeil Wright. I am coming to you from my home, and it is about 7:05 here in the evening, but we are so happy that we're able to do this for you all. I know it's always difficult to get into some of OJP's trainings, so we are happy to have collaborated with the TFSC, who's working alongside with us to present this to you. I'm going to let you know a little bit about the agenda today. So what we're going to be doing is going through pass-through entities and oversight responsibilities for sub-recipients, and we'll have a Q&A. So you'll have the opportunity to ask all of your burning questions that you've been holding on to, and we're happy to assist you there. We'll also go over some case scenarios and activities and do a Q&A there as well. And then we'll have an open discussion in Q&A. Again, more questions can be asked. And keep in mind that I am from the Office of Justice Programs, OCFO. So it is my division who is coming out and doing a lot of the monitoring when we were able to go on site, but we're doing financial monitoring. So certainly if there's any questions around that, as it relates to subrecipients, you can ask those as well. And then we'll go into a closing, next steps, and open discussion. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to Michael Williams, who will be doing the presentation on pass-through entity oversight, responsibilities for subrecipients. Let's go, Mike.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. Again, my name is Michael Williams from the Office of Justice Programs. Good morning to those and good afternoon to those others that are on the line. This presentation will give you, I want to say, a pretty good idea of your responsibilities when looking at subrecipients, the responsibilities that you have, and certain expectations that you should have for your subrecipients to ensure that they meet their goals and objectives of their particular programs. So let's look at the topics for discussion for this particular session. I always want to start off with definitions. I believe that if you understand the definitions of the terms that we're actually using, it will give you the foundation that you need to understand most of the concepts and the principles behind the topics that we'll be talking about. Then we'll get into the determinations of subrecipients versus contractors. It's very important that you understand the difference between the two, because I found in some cases where an organization, when trying to determine a subrecipient from a contractor, miss certain crucial aspects of that and then misclassify an organization as a contractor when they should have been a subrecipient. Then we'll get into specific details in reference to the responsibility of the pass-through organization and the things that they need to be mindful of. Next slide, please. Then we'll go on and talk about the pre-award process, understanding your responsibility and certain things that you need to be mindful of at the pre-award process for sub-awards. How those sub-awards are actually made, the things that you have to be mindful of prior to making a sub-award. Then we'll get into the post-award process. And the most important thing that I want to really bring to your attention in the post-award process is the risk assessment, your responsibility for analyzing the risk of those entities that you'll be passing grant funds down to. And then ultimately, we'll be talking about, or I'll give you some resources, some takeaways that you can take back with you to use in this process when you're dealing with subrecipients. So as I started off with talking about this, the definitions, it's important that you understand the definitions of the terms that will be used. And so we'll talk about pass-through entities, subrecipients, and contractors. So what is a pass-through entity? Now, a pass-through entity is a non-federal entity that provides the sub-award to a subrecipient, and the key here is to carry out part of that federal award. That's the most important thing that you'll always be looking for to determine whether or not we're talking about a subrecipient. Are you tasking them with carrying out elements of that particular federal award? These definitions that I'll be going over can also be found in 2 CFR in the definition sections of the 2 CFR 200.1. Next slide, please. So what is a sub-award? Okay, an award that is provided by the pass-through entity to the subrecipient. And again, remember what I said, they will be carrying out an aspect of that federal award that was given to them by the pass-through entity. Now, here's something that I want you to know. that when we're talking about subawards, it does not include payments to a contractor or an individual that may be a beneficiary of a federal grant program. And I give an example of what I mean when I'm talking about a beneficiary of a federal grant program. OJP, or Department of Justice, provides funding to the spouses of falling officers. So again, keep in mind that those funds are being passed down through Department of Justice to that spouse. But again, it does not meet the definition of a subaward. So again, when we're talking about contractors, for someone that's going to be the beneficiary of a federal grant program, they are not considered a subaward. Next slide, please. So again, what is a subrecipient? A subrecipient is a non-federal entity that receives the award from the pass-through entity. And again, key, I'm going to continue to stress this because this is where a lot of organizations miss this classification, is that the entity is carrying out a part of that federal grant program. And I'll give you some examples later on of what I mean so you can get a clear understanding of carrying out an aspect of a federal grant program. Next slide, please. So what is a contract? So a contract is a legal instrument by which the non-federal entity is either going to be purchasing property or services needed to carry out that particular grant program. So again, and I'll get into this later, don't get hung up on the term services here, because services could also be provided under a federal grant award. The terms as used in this particular part does not include a legal instrument, even if the non-federal entity is considering it a contract. So again, and that's to let you know that an organization may misclassify an organization as a contractor, but that's not necessarily how the federal government will look at that particular arrangement, especially if it meets the definition for a federal award or a sub-award. Next slide, please. What is a contractor? The contractor is the entity that receives the contract as defined on the previous slide. Next slide. So now let's get into talking about the subrecipient versus the contractor determination and how you go about doing that process. Next slide, please. One thing to keep in mind is that the determination on whether an entity that is receiving these federal funds is a subrecipient or a contractor in a lot of cases is not always straightforward. So sometimes you have to really look at, and I always say, whether or not they're carrying out an aspect of that particular grant program to determine on what instrument this actually should be. Now, OMB says that there is no one factor alone that can distinguish one from another. In most cases, I do agree with that because you're looking at various aspects of it. But again, I think I always hang my head on if the organization that you're passing the funds down to is implementing an aspect of that particular grant program, then to me, I think it's a clear case that we're talking about a subrecipient as opposed to a contractor. So an entity may possess various attributes or characteristics from either a contract or a subrecipient classification. So again, you want to look at the classifications for each to determine one from the other. In most cases, I always want to say that if you have more characteristics on one side of the spectrum than the other, then it's a good chance that you've made the proper determination. Next slide, please. But I want to say the key in determining whether or not we're talking about a subrecipient or a contractor is I don't want you to get hung up on looking at the form, okay? Hear what I mean when I say the form, the type of instrument that was issued in order to get into the agreement. So I don't want you to be concerned whether or not we're issuing a memorandum of understanding, a contract, partnership, or whatever. That's the form of the arrangement. What I want you to be concerned with is the substance. The substance. What is actually being, and I'll use this term, contracted here in order to determine what vehicle we're talking about. So again, I'm always looking at the substance. What are we actually bringing this party into this business in order to receive those funds? Next slide, please. So OMB came up with this characteristic slide to use in order to determine whether or not we're talking about a contractor or we're talking about a subrecipient. So if you look at the last one for subrecipient, this is the one that I normally say that I hang my head on. So we're talking about, in accordance with the agreement, uses the federal funds to carry out a program for a public purpose specified in the authorizing statutes, okay? Carrying out an aspect of that particular grant. Now, on the other side, when we're talking about contract or contractor, some organizations that have been using this particular chart or something similar to it has gotten hung up on one term and has misclassified an organization as a contractor instead of a subrecipient. So if you look at the first two and the fourth one, it talks about providing goods and services. Providing goods and services. Now, an organization may be providing a service, but it's still a subrecipient. So let me give you an example on how not to get caught up if somebody is providing a service when they're actually a subrecipient. So let's just say that this particular program that you're tasked with is to provide job placement, training, and mentoring to a particular class of youth. And the idea of this particular program is to give them an alternative from joining gangs, okay? So your organization is capable of providing the training and the job placement, but your organization lacks the expertise in order to do the mentoring component with this particular program. So your organization goes out and hires a company to come in and provide that mentoring services for this particular grant program. So although they're providing a service, it's a part of that grant program to carry out that particular grant program as a part of the statutes of that particular grant program. So even though they're providing a service, they are actually providing or carrying out an aspect of that particular grant. So that would make them a subrecipient as opposed to a contractor. So my takeaway with this is do not get hung up on the term service and automatically define a contract to be a contract as opposed to a sub-award. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about the pass-through entity's responsibility. Your responsibility for subrecipients and your oversight in reference to ensuring that they meet the goals and objectives of that particular grant program. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about the pass-through entity, what we're talking about is you need to make sure that the subrecipient is using the grant funds for the design principles of that particular grant, using it in accordance to the policy and procedures, the goals and objectives of that particular grant program. Now, I'll say this way because I really want you to understand the seriousness of your oversight of the grant program. So over here I have that you're going to be responsible for the day-to-day operations at the subrecipient level. Now, I don't mean that you need to set up a desk down at the subrecipient level, but it is your responsibility to ensure that the subrecipient is following the guidelines of that particular grant program. So one of the things that you'll be responsible for is the terms and conditions associated with that particular grant program that the federal government has passed on to you. You want to make sure that you're passing those same guidelines down to the subrecipient. Because again, remember what I said, you want to make sure that they are achieving their goals and objectives in order to be able to report back to you so that you can provide that information to the funding source. So again, you want to make sure that they are running their program in a timely manner to meet the goals and objectives. Next slide, please. So again, you want to ensure that the subrecipient is submitting documentation to you necessary to meet all of the federal requirements of that particular grant program. Now, I'll give you an example of timelines that you're going to have to establish something other than what the federal guidelines are. And I'll give you an example. So let's look at the federal financial reports that are due quarterly, and there's a 30-day grace period. So in order to ensure that you are following the guidelines, you can't give your subrecipient that same 30 days in order to get that particular financial report to you. So what you may do is allow them 20, maybe 25 days in order to get that so that you can combine all this information and make sure that you get it to the federal organization in a timely manner. One thing to always keep in mind is that if there are things going wrong down at the subrecipient level, it is your responsibility to get with them. So whether they need training, other types of support from your particular organization, you want to make sure that you're providing them with what they need in order to get them back on track in order to implement that particular grant program. So there needs to be dialogue, or they need to understand that if they're unsure with something that they're doing, that you are always there for them to assist them. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about that pre-award process. Next slide. In dealing with the pre-award process, your organization must establish policy and procedures on how sub-awards will be made and managed. So what type of announcements are you sending out? How are you making sure that your sub-recipients or these entities are eligible for these particular grant programs? And then how will they be managed throughout the life cycle of that particular program? Again, when we're talking about policy and procedures, we're talking about everything in reference to these sub-recipients, monitoring requirements, those reports that I was talking about, making sure that they get to you in a timely manner. And again, letting them know the type of funding that's out there, how much these awards will be for, and all the eligibility requirements for that. These sub-recipients are in your documentation for managing sub-awards. All of this information is relevant. It needs to be in there, clearly stated. Next slide, please. I put this in here for a particular reason because, and I'm talking about the first bullet. I normally get questions from pass-through organizations in reference to their sub-recipients not necessarily implementing the grant program as they should, or things that they found out about the sub-recipient that they didn't know up front. So I'm saying is that I highly recommend that you do some form of pre-award risk assessment prior to making these sub-awards. And there are different things that you can do in reference to seeing whether or not the applicant is eligible, whether or not they qualify, looking at their financial stability to make sure that they can manage these grant funds, any history of performance that they have with you. And then I think that one of the good things to look at, because not only will it tell you something about the organization, but whether or not they're having issues with other organizations. And that's that audit report. So again, the OMB does not require pass-through entities to do the pre-award risk assessment. I just think that it's a good measure to do because I've had organizations call me saying that the organization that they made the sub-award to is no longer in business and they can't locate them. And I think that maybe if they've done some form of a pre-award risk assessment, they may have been able to find in grants.gov that this organization was on its way out or had did not successfully do a grant program in the past. So, it's not a requirement, but it's something that I do highly recommend that you at least think about doing, because the results of a risk assessment can assist you in determining whether or not there needs to be certain terms and conditions added to that award up front, because already you are aware of certain things that have came to your attention by doing this pre-award risk assessment. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about that post-award risk assessment, which is a requirement. Next slide, please. So the pass-through entity must perform a risk assessment of each subrecipient for their ability to not be in compliance with the federal statutes, regulations, and terms and conditions of the award. So remember what I said, based on all of the terms and conditions and the regulations that we have on the award for you, you want to make sure that you're passing those things down to the subrecipient. And again, by doing this, it helps you determine the appropriate level of monitoring that is needed for your subrecipients. Even though I am talking to you financially, you must also keep in mind the program requirements for that grant award. So when you're doing this post-award risk assessment, not only financial attributes, but also programmatic attributes need to be included in doing this risk assessment. Regardless of how you do the risk assessment and the attributes that you use, you should get to a outcome where we're talking about either a high, medium, or low risk recipient, okay? You can use multiple things. You can use numbers to say that anything that's over 25 moves them into a medium risk assessment. So again, you determine what those risk factors are and you provide the weight of those particular items and how they should be. But I'll give you an example of how to do that weight determination in a second. Next slide, please. So here's what I was actually talking about on the last slide. Pass-through entity should develop a method to determine whether or not an organization is a high, low, or medium risk. Now, the factors of this example that I have here, I'm using the number scheme. So As you can see for the first one, confidential funds or petty cash. I believe anytime an organization has money on site, whether it's in a lockbox or whatever the case is, I believe that when you have money on site, the likelihood for mismanagement or some type of fraud is high. So as you can see here, I labeled it as 3, which would be a high risk. Sub-awards, $25,000 or less. Now let me explain to you why I'm listing this or classifying this as a 1 or a low risk. This organization normally makes sub-awards in excess of $500,000. So to make a small award for $25,000, the risk to your agency and the federal government, to me, is low. And then delinquent reports. I'm showing it as a 2 or medium. Now, don't get me wrong. One delinquent report is not necessarily a medium or even a high risk, but multiple reports. Once you start getting into 2 and 3 reports being delinquent, it's now time to investigate to try to figure out, is there a problem with reporting this information to you? Because the deal is that whether we're talking about low, medium, or high, you want to make sure that your monitoring plan fits them, because the idea is to mitigate the risk to the federal government and your agency and move someone that is a high risk to at least medium, but the ultimate goal is to get them to low risk. Next slide, please. So the assessment of these attributes should provide the basis for developing that monitoring plan, okay? It should allow you to look at who you need to look at this year, who you could postpone to look at next year, and whether or not a desk review or a phone call will suffice. Here's the most important thing that I want to share with you. There's nothing in the uniform guidance that says that monitoring must be done on site. Now, trust me, I think that in some cases when you're looking at agencies, an on-site review is warranted, okay? Now, I'm talking about prior to the pandemic, but there are other ways to do this. But again, based on those factors and that risk level that you come up with, it may warrant you to go and look at a particular organization, okay? Now, again, the most important thing is why this process is not all-inclusive. The deal is that it should help you to come up with an annual plan, because keep this in mind, you have to do an annual plan of the population of your sub-recipients. Some sub-recipients awards will expire and may not get new funding, and then you'll have new grantees that come in. So as you move sub-awards in and out of your portfolio, the most important thing is that this needs to be done annually. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about this sub-recipient monitoring. Next slide. So when we're talking about sub-recipient monitoring, again, remember what I said, that you're looking at the risk level of your sub-recipients' portfolio, so whether that they're high, medium, or low. Again, the uniform guidance does not dictate what type of monitoring review needs to be done. But again, the types are either on-site or an in-house desk review. Again, you can probably, I'm sure you can do more in-house reviews than on-site. And again, it's just the detail of the information, because you can do an in-house review and be just as detailed or thorough as you would have been if you were on-site. And again, the implementation of a monitoring plan may also result in identifying potential areas of concern, whereas then maybe this subrecipient needs some type of training or technical assistance from you. So whatever the case is again, looking at this monitoring plan, it should help you determine what needs to be done. Next slide, please. So when preparing for a review, the pass-through entity should review all documents prior to either going on site or having that dialogue with the subrecipient. So the things that you're looking at is the application. What was awarded for this particular award, whether we're talking about salaries, equipment, you're looking at that. Looking at those reports, financial and programmatic reports, because the financial report, along with the progress report, can tell you whether or not this subrecipient is on track for meeting the goals and objectives of that grant program. Drawdown history. Have they drawn down most of the funds, but according to the progress report, doesn't appear like they've done much. And then again, looking at the audit reports. When you're looking at the audit reports, to me, the most important thing to look at is whether or not there are any cross-cutting issues. And what I mean by a cross-cutting issue is that there's an issue that even though it's with a HUD grant program, based on the actual finding, it could have a bearing, or it will have a bearing on the DOJ grant. So something like that would be that the organization's accounting system is not able to track funds separately. So even though it was noted on a HUD grant program, that's probably an issue with a DOJ grant as well. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about best practices for on-site reviews, or in some cases a desk review, because some of these things will carry through. But the first thing you want to do is notify the subrecipient that you're getting ready to look at their particular grant program. If you're going on site, the next thing that you want to do is this entrance conference. Let them know why you're there. Then you're looking at the supporting documentation, analyzing this documentation, because the key is to make sure that the costs that have been charged to the grant, that they can justify and support it. At the conclusion of your review, there needs to be an exit conference to let them know what it was that you found, what was resolved, what still needs to be resolved. And based on that, there's going to be some follow-up after that in order to get that resolved. Based on that, there should be a corrective action plan, if applicable, if there are unresolved findings. And then once everything is satisfactorily resolved, then you can close out that particular site visit. Next slide, please. Remedies for subrecipients that are not in compliance with the sub-award. Next slide. Now, one of the best ways to ensure that there are less issues at the subrecipient level is that agreement, that sub-award, that contract needs to be as detailed as possible. And I give an example of something that happened to me with an organization where the subrecipient complained about the pass-through entity, but the pass-through entity had done a fantastic job in making sure that the agreement was nice and thorough. Subrecipient called me and asked me to explain the 10% rule. So right off the bat, I was kind of taken by the call because I was unaware that it was a subrecipient. So I explained the 10% rule. So when I explained the 10% rule, you can move money between approved budget categories up to 10% without prior approval. Then the subrecipient said, I thought that was the case, but the state said I couldn't do it. So when they said the state said that they couldn't do it, I was I knew at that point I was talking to a sub-recipient. So what I asked the sub-recipient is that, what was in the actual agreement? So the state agency did allow some flexibility. They only allowed them to move 5% between approved budget categories. And I asked, and she said, well, it was only 5%. And I asked, I said, well, did you sign the award or the agreement? And they said, yes. So I said, well, there isn't much that I can do for you because it was specified in the agreement and you signed it, agreeing that you would abide by those particular rules and regulations. So in the event that you're having issues with the subrecipient, you can temporarily withhold funds pending the correction of whatever those particular issues are. Disallow costs if it's something that is not in compliance with the award. Partially or wholly suspend or terminate that subaward. Initiate suspension or debarment. Withhold future subawards or other legal remedies that may be available. The thing to keep in mind is that even though you have these particular items at your disposal, you just can't drop the hammer on a subrecipient. You have to give them an opportunity to try to correct whatever the deficiency is, and then you're putting them on notice that if you can't do X, Y, and Z by this particular time, this is a consequence of what could happen. Next slide, please. Now, let's talk about the closeout process. Next slide. So again, remember what I said about the reporting requirements. So when you're getting into closing out a grant, you want to make sure that you close out a sub-award in ample time so that you can get all of the documentations from them and roll up all of that information in your final report. But again, the pass-through entity may approve an extension if the sub-recipient needs it, but keep in mind, it has to be within the time frame of your particular award. Close out the sub-award when all the administrative and programmatic requirements have been completed, and then require the subrecipient to submit all financial programmatic reports to the pass-through entity in that specific time that you agree to or specify in the award to ensure that all reports get to the federal government in a timely manner. Next slide, please. So I talked about some resources. So let me give you a couple takeaways for resources. Next slide. Some good documents to use is always the 2 CFR. I want to make sure that you're using the electronic version of the 2 CFR because it is, for the most part, updated weekly. So you always want to make sure that you're looking at the current date or for the 2 CFR to see when the last time it was updated. Another resource is the DOJ Financial Guide. We're just about complete with the updates. It is our hope that the new versions of the DOJ Financial Guide is made available by the end of this year, no later than the beginning of next year. I always like to include these particular documents. Not saying that an organization or your organization does not have good internal controls in place, but I've always found these 2 documents to be good documents to compare with your organizations to make sure that the internal controls that you have at a minimum, when we're talking about federal grant programs, meet those particular standards. So the first one is what we call the Green Book, which is the standards for internal controls in the federal government. And then this other document that we call COSO, which is the Internal Controls Integrated Framework. So these are 2 good documents for policy and procedures or that can help you enhance your current policy and procedures. Next slide, please. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to our host.
So here are the results. The most frequently indicated area was sub-recipient monitoring, okay? at 80%. 8 out of 10 you indicated that. And then next in line was post-award risk assessment, remedies for non-compliance, and closeout requirements. So that's helpful to us. And thank you for responding.
All right. Hi, everyone. Next slide. I want to highlight that we have some resources for you today. So you'll be able to access the guide sheet and job aid checklist that we have for you by clicking the link on the chat. Also wanted to mention that at the conclusion of this webinar series, we'll prepare a summary report that we'll send to people who attended. And this will summarize the key takeaways of the webinar, and it could be a resource for you and something else you can share with colleagues. I also wanted to put a plug in for our next live discussion webinar that's going to happen in December. You should be getting information via email about how to register, and we're going to be focusing on the topic of procurement. All right, let's do some polls. So for our poll question, we wanted to hear from you, what areas of procurement would you like to learn about or discuss in our next live discussion webinar? So we have bidding and selection, documentation of procurement, sole source justifications, implementing show mounting procedures for contracts, and other. If there's a topic you don't see mentioned here, you can always put it in the chat. All right, so far, the majority of folks selected preparing a sole source justification. Great, thank you. Let's go to the next poll. All right, so for the peer sharing session, we be happy to feature any grantees to kind of share about their best practices in procurement and what they've learned with other grantees. So if you're interested in presenting and sharing in procurement about what you do in that area, any policies and procedures you develop, etc., let us know. And also let us know if you're happy to attend and listen, and if you want to hear more. Okay, so we have 4 who would like to join and listen, and 1 person like to hear more. So yeah, just reach out to us or put your contact information, and we'll be happy to share more information about the webinar. All right, thank you for participating in this poll. I'm going to turn it over to Jamil, who's going to walk us through next steps and then close the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great, thank you, Francis. So let's take a look at the next steps, and then I'll wrap everything up in a nice bow. All right, so please take a few moments to complete our webinar evaluation survey, which is linked in the chat. You can also scan the QR code right here on your screen with your mobile device. You just point your camera at it and click the link to open it. And to contact the Virtual Support Center or the VSC, you can email us at ojptfsc@usdoj.gov. And responses to email inquiries usually take about 24 hours within the next business day to get back to you. You can also schedule a consultation call with the financial specialist with the details provided in the chat. Check out our website at ojp.gov/TFSC and sign up for our listserv with the details provided in the chat. Our next event, titled Learning Exchange Training Series number 3, Peer Discussion Webinar Procurement, will be held in December, and the date and time is to be dated. And also a link for that can be found in the chat box, as well as a link to our listserv. And on behalf of the OJP TFSC, I would like to thank the presenters and the attendees for joining today and having this great session. Just a reminder, please complete that evaluation for this session using the link provided in the chat. Have a great day or night, depending on where you're at, and I hope everyone enjoyed the session. You may now disconnect.